thanks everyone for coming. Quite a lot of you here. Always good to see. But yeah, today Gearbox, Lido, lots of LSD discussion, get into what it means coming up with Shanghai upgrade and all that kind of good stuff. So I think supposed to kick us off. Let's go from left to right from on my screen. We've got Carvas, the Gearbox, and then a very. But yeah, if we could start with Carvas, just brief intro, day to day, what you're doing at Lido, and then we'll just work along the chain and see what everyone's up to.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Carvas. I'm a contributor at Lido. My main work has been for the past half a year, I would say, working and managing the rewards program, which is basically Lido's liquidity program of incentives of how we incentivize all of the different pools that we have for the different ST assets. So ST Sol, ST ETH, ST Matic, and all of the others. Um, Other than this, I do some BD work and some analytics work, but it's always related to how can we maintain as deep as possible on-chain liquidity for Lido's assets. And yeah, happy to be speaking now. I heard the intro blockmates from the last time we spoke on the Tapioca Discord, and thanks for that as well. Kind words.
No problem at all, no problem. So I think we've got Muggle on the Gearbox account, so yeah, take it away.
Hey, hi bosses. I largely look after the marketing side. So I'm a marketing sided contributor for Gearbox. So yeah, I largely shitpost and wait for alias bosses to actually vote, and then I go ahead and just make content out of it.
Yeah, I think we're all professional shitposters at times, aren't we? So
Yeah.
and yeah, just moving along the chain, we've got let's go.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Ilgis. I'm working on product side, responsible for math, risks, and everything related for this site on Gearbox.
Nice. So there might be a few. If you aren't unaware of both protocols, one, where have you been? But I suppose this is all supposed to be a little bit more educational as well. But if we could start with Carvas and just give a high level of Lido, and then we'll go along high level of Gearbox, and then we'll start getting into the synergies, like looking at kind of what's happening with Shanghai and how the kind of synergies work between the two protocols. So yeah, Carvas, if you take it away with a high level of Lido, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So, super high level TLDR of Lido for anyone that's not aware. So, Lido was one of the protocols that introduced liquid staking, especially for Ethereum, because Ethereum has had this peculiarity for 2 years now, where it's the largest chain that enables staking of native assets, but there's no way to unstake. So it was a one-way. It was and is still a one-way directional staking ability, where people couldn't exit those positions that they had staked, unless their own infrastructure or just giving a read to a centralized player like a SEX and staking via you get.
I don't know if it's just on my end, but it might be cutting out a little bit.
With still. Sorry,
Right.
1 second. Let me try to fix that.
Yeah. I don't know. Muggle,
I'll come closer to
are you getting Carvas loud and clear, or is it
No,
is it my end?
breaking up a bit.
All right. Well, while we're sorting that, let's get the kind of high level of Gearbox, how we've got to the point we are now, and then I suppose while Carvas is sorting that out, then we can kind of get back to start talking about some synergies and kind of how both protocols can work together.
Yeah, absolutely. Elias boss, why don't you take it? I mean, you're the OG over here, so you should go ahead and take this one.
Yeah, okay. So Gearbox is two-sided protocol. So first side is like passive pool liquidity providers, very similar to Compound in the other side. And interesting part happens on the other side. It's the sites where we can get leverage and apply usually to any DeFi protocol. So actually, Gearbox acts as generalized leverage tool for any DeFi protocol in our space. Yep.
Yeah,
Michael, if you want to add something, please go.
Yeah, exactly as Ilgis was said. We are effectively a base layer of leverage for whatever DeFi protocols that we can work on with safely at the moment. So risk and safety is one of our key priorities, which is why we do not have as extensive a list at the moment. But that's the goal at the end point of becoming a generalized leverage protocol. How we do this is through a tech piece called CA and a lending market on the other hand. You can effectively borrow funds in order to gain leverage. The funds that you borrow can be up to 9x of your collateral, and that's how you gain leverage. All of these funds, the borrowed funds as well as your collateral, go to the credit account that we talked about, and thus are never in the ownership of the person who actually created the account, but they can point it towards the strategies that are allowed. So it's a very safe mechanism of gaining leverage on chain while still ensuring that there is no bad debt.
yeah, and there's some pretty good borrowing APIs on some of the assets in the pool if anyone's looking for a little bit of
Yep. We actually recently
interest
had
there.
Balancer deploy a gauge because of how consistently good and safe the LP passive side has been over the last few months since we launched V2. And yeah, so that's been going good. That's a pretty good use case.
Yeah, can you just expand on that a little bit? Because as I was saying when we chatted last time, I kind of thought I'd covered the whole protocol, and then you started bringing up like how protocols could use it for the LP side as well.
Yeah,
I just thought that was really interesting. I think everyone would be interested to hear.
absolutely. So here's how I'll actually put it. So if you look at our lending side varies from the general lending markets that we have seen till now in the manner that utility is available on the DApp itself, like right through leverage, which from what we have seen has had very good demand. Uh, just by the potential of it, the kind of uses that we have at the moment, we can even probably triple our TVL and still have a similar level of utilization, which is a great thing to have. What this does, though, is it effectively gives you a very consistent and high APY. So what Balancer has done is they looked at this. They looked at the model where you can actually lend your funds without the borrower custodying them, and they have effectively deployed a gauge for their LPs. So usually what happens is LPs sit in a pool and they make money through trading fees or different things, but the funds in itself, the ones that are not being swapped consistently, so there's some capacity for deployment on that side. So any idle LP funds that they have where they feel the liquidity is too high for a pool, they're now going to start putting that into these gauges so that they can generate some additional yield on it, thus making their LPs more productive. So that's where they have chosen Gearbox amongst a couple more protocols, where they'll be depositing their funds from the LPs, thus boosting RTVL and while making their LPs productive. So that's a very good use case, and Gearbox is a two-sided market, right? Because a lending market is also something that performs very well, and leverage is something that's where the true innovation lies and actually fuels the LP side.
Nice, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that was great when you kind of brought that up during our last chat. But it was really good to reiterate that. Carver, see you back. Are you with us? I'd just love to, if you're alive and working, I'd love to get into. And I know
I
yeah, I think you're back. I'd just love to get into kind of
yeah.
how you guys at Lido are thinking about how you guys are positioning for Shanghai. Obviously, it's a huge kind of upgrade across the network, but I think more importantly for the liquid staking providers and kind of protocols that are kind of partnering or built around those products as well. So I'd love to hear how you guys are thinking internally about Shanghai, and just to try and give us a little bit of insight on how you guys are thinking.
Yeah, of course. So let me know if the connection is good now. I tried to switch Wi-Fi sources. Um, for Shanghai itself, obviously, I would say it's probably number one or number two most important upgrades that affect Lido directly. Of course, the merge being the other. Lido introduced recently, I think maybe like 2 weeks ago, Lido V2, which is also the largest technical upgrade to the Lido protocol itself since launch, which was in December 2020. And Lido V2 introduces two main things that are very related to the timing of the Shanghai updates in March. The first one, it's not the main thing that I'm probably going to discuss because it would be better to have other people discussing that first thing, which is the staking router. And the staking router is basically a way that in the future, Ethereum that's staked with Lido is going to be routed to different ways and different agents that will validate those blocks and actually stake it for the users that hold the STs. And then the second one is implementation of withdrawals. So basically, as I was saying in the intro, but then my connection cut off. Since the beginning of the launch of the weekend chain in December 2020, there has been the ability to stake it, but never to unstake it. And that was one of the main use cases of liquid staking. So you could just sell the tokenized position instead of actually having to unstake. And now you're going to be able to do both, right? So post implementation of withdrawals at Lido and post Shanghai upgrade to Ethereum, you will be able to both sell your ST from the market or actually go directly and then stake the ETH from it. Yeah, basically that's the thing. In terms of implications for Lido, I think the two main things that will have to change. One of them is this implementation, and then the other I think is more pertaining to my work, so I can give a bit more context there, which is that for a long time, one of the biggest centers of incentives that Lido was giving out, and also one of the biggest costs for the DAO, was to incentivize very, very deep pools in DeFi. So for the past 2 years, probably like the deepest pool in all dexes was the STETH and the ETH curve pool. In the bull market, it's had $5-6 billion of TVL, just one pool, right? And even now during the bear, it has over 1.5 billion. And post withdrawals, it's not going to be as important to have 2 billion of on-chain liquidity for STETH because at the end of the day, there will be redeemability, and so people will not have to rely on always exiting of stake positions by selling them on the market. And so we normally when I talk about this, I say that for a liquid staking token, before there was only secondary markets, and now there's going to be a primary market as well. So I think that's one of the biggest things that will come up. I think this is actually counterintuitively very good for liquid staking because one could say that liquid staking loses some of its value proposition post withdrawals because now other types of staking that are not liquid can also kind of get the liquidity of exiting. But there's another way of seeing it, which is that if you know that you have the ability to unstake, it also de-risks a lot the active staking itself, right? And one of the things that is very curious about Ethereum now is that it's the largest by market cap. It's the largest POS chain, but it's the POS chain of the major one that has the lower percentage of staking participation, like much less than Solana, than Matic, or actually Polygon POS, Avalanche, and all of the others. And I think one of the biggest exponents for that is that people haven't had the ability to unstake, and so just the opportunity cost and the risk calculations of going into a stake position of ETH were much higher. And so I personally, and not speaking for Lido, but I personally see a lot more stake coming into Ethereum overall. And I think a big part of that is just going to be into liquid staking because of all of the composability that it allows now.
Yeah, great answer. So just like a TLDR for my kind of idiot brand there. So before Shanghai, you've kind of primarily been focused on what is the cost benefit to incentivize staked ETH pools across different DeFi protocols. And then off the back of Shanghai kind of going live when people can actually stake with Lido and then just redeem the ETH because withdrawals will be available. Does this put Lido in a position where it becomes more kind of, I don't know if is profitable the right word, or sustainable, or reducing the emissions drastically? And like, how do you guys kind of think of that? And is there any kind of rough projections of how kind of those emissions will come down and you still be able to kind of get the best bang for your buck effectively?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Although that has been something that has been happening for maybe half a year now, which is that notoriously Lido was known to have this massive incentives program for on-chain liquidity, which was like was a part of the strategy to actually make ST very usable by protocols, and was what allowed like Aave to integrate it, Maker to integrate it as collateral on those, and really boosted the usability and utility of ST. But the incentives program has been coming down very drastically over I think maybe since September, since the merge. So imagine that in 2022, in a normal month, in the summer or before, it was around 5 million LDO a month, which is a very, very large amount. And now we just published the budget asking basically the DAO for those incentives for March, and it's going to be 1.1 million. So that was already a big come down that a lot of people don't realize. But post withdrawals, it's super expected to have it be even lower, right? Because of exactly what you mentioned. We don't really look at it as profitability. It's more that the treasury will just be, we'll just have a much higher runway, right? So if we're not paying 5 million a month and we're paying 5K LDO a month, and we have 100 million LDO in the treasury, it just allows the protocol to just keep that run rate of incentives and all of that for much longer. And then the other interesting thing is that if we don't need to have 2 billion or 3 billion of dollars of on-chain liquidity for ST, then a lot of those incentives that we're supporting that can be directed towards other things, right? So we can diversify the types of pairs that pair impulse against ST, like have stablecoins and other governance tokens, or just other sorts of integrations that are not specifically ETH and ST in a pool.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And my final question, which I think will be a good segue into the Gearbox side as well, is where primarily have the lion's share of emissions being distributed towards? Is it Curve, Convex? Is there any additional ones? I know Balancer and Aura starting to get the much needed, well-deserved attention. Is there kind of additional protocols that you kind of foresee in the near future that kind of could be subject to those kind of incentives and emissions and things like that as well?
Yeah, totally. So exactly right. Historically, Curve has been by far the largest pool receiving incentives from Lido. At one point in 2022, it was receiving around 2.5 million LDO a month just for those LPs, which is a very, very significant amount. And again, it was billions of dollars of TVL there. So that was the effect of it. Balancer is our second largest incentives line item, but there are a bunch of other dexes, and there are also cross-chain incentives, right, for ST Solana Solana, for ST Matic on Polygon, and all of the others. Going forward, like liquidity really had to be supportive throughout the last 2 years for Lido, because that's one of the parts of the product that made it work of ST. If it didn't have liquidity, then people wouldn't be comfortable going into the position, so they'd just have that blocker and not drive growth. Integrations wouldn't be comfortable supporting a good risk parameters for ST, because again, if any sort of significant amount got liquidated there, they need to just throw off the ratio of ST to ETH in terms of price. And large users also wouldn't be able to enter the positions because there just wouldn't be size for them. And there was no way to support liquidity at that depth without a large incentives program. Now that's not going to be the case. So we think that there's a possibility of incentivizing other sorts of integrations, even though that we think that other integrations should be sustainable at some point by themselves, right? So, for example, our Aave integration is one of the most successful ones in DeFi, where there's the very famous loop of just depositing STs, borrowing it there, converting that back into STs, and then doing that 3 times around. And that's an integration that really doesn't need any sorts of incentives. It just works organically, and the yield is also organic because lenders of ETH are getting paid, stakers and leveraged stakers in that case as well. And so it's a perfectly good integration that doesn't really need any sorts of incentives. So I think it will be important to bootstrap some new stuff, but at the end of the day, we're all aiming for sustainability. So
yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Great answer as usual. So yeah, from the Gearbox side, how are you guys thinking about going into Shanghai? Is there like immediate effects? Is this kind of second and third order effects? It's just nice to kind of hear from the other side of the fence, like how you guys are thinking about it going into it. Don't know who wants to pick that one up, or Mugalo.
Yes, first of all, I guess I should note that leveraging Stake to Seed is one of the largest use cases in Gearbox, and there we should see that there is original leverage staking of Lido, and second one is where actually users leverage their curve convex positions. And second one, I guess, use case very similar to the other use case that Carlos mentioned before. And second use case is something more unique and possible only on the Gearbox side. And after Shanghai release, I believe there will be some changes here because like risk for having stake position will dramatically reduce because like for now the only option to withdraw assets is like sell on Curve and other deep liquidity pools. And that's the reason why Lido team has big incentives for such kind of pools. And after Shanghai release, there will be like usual use case when you can withdraw money from staking contract. And that from my vision that this is reduce some interest rate spread between Ethereum and staked Ethereum rewards. But still, I guess that leverage staking will not die. Just maybe API that users wanted to get will be lower, but also that comes with lowering the risk of that kind of position, yeah, because like there is no need to, there is no option to be stuck in some liquidity crunch crisis and so on, so on. So I think leverage staking use case will remain. Liquidity for staked Ethereum on DEXs, I guess, a little bit reduced after lowering the rewards, but still the more demand will be for organic trading goes, the more API goes from organic trading on DEXs. So I guess like there will be some other equilibrium point for both leverage staking, DEX liquidity, and I guess Gearbox inventory here would be very beneficial to build different leverage strategies on such kind of stuff.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So just to separate out the kind of looping strategy on Aave from Gearbox, obviously both great examples of how you could effectively lever up staked ETH. So with the Aave side, you'd be effectively depositing staked ETH in Lido, borrowing stables, rebuying staked ETH and deposit, and then just looping it that way. So from the Gearbox side, how does that look without having to go through those loops, and what's the capital efficiency like going through Gearbox?
Yeah, in Gearbox, leverage users, they open credit account. Credit account is like leverage primitive invented by Gearbox. It's the latest smart contract where you can deposit initial collateral and then borrow up to extend funds from the liquidity pools. So in case of leveraging staked Ethereum, for example, you can deposit 1 Ethereum, get later 10 Ethereum from the pools as debt, and then you have this 10 Ethereum on your credit account, which actually like some smart contract wallet. And you can't just withdraw this money or go away. You have limited options to interact with different DeFi protocols. And one of these protocols is you can interact with Lido, smart contracts. Other use case, you can interact with Curve trading pools. So, for example, you can swap a little bit, 50% of your Ethereum to staked Ethereum, and then deposit it to Curve. Got as a result LP position, STH, CRV, and then you can deposit this LP Curve tokens to Convex, and yeah, as a result, you have like this leverage position. You get rewards from both CRV, CVX, and Lido on their staking contracts, but everything actually like on your credit account, so you can withdraw staking rewards later, and yeah, and that's how it works.
Yeah, I'll just add that to a bit. So the larger difference that you see between leverage that you get through staking versus on Gearbox is the capital efficiency bit that you exactly touched upon. So if you're going with Aave, if they have an LTV of say 80%, then effectively you can only borrow up to 80% of the value that you have put up as collateral. And when you go with the second turn on it, it goes down to 64, and after that it goes down to about 50%. And what effectively happens over time is that your leverage becomes very limited. So about 3x, 3.5x is maximum you can get after looping quite a lot, right? If you go through the gearbox mechanism where you can, borrow up to 9x of your collateral, that's where you get capital efficiency that's much higher. Just in terms of percentages, a 3x is effectively a 300% efficiency, while we can offer you about 1,000% on your capital. Meanwhile, the entire mechanism of doing the same thing is much simpler, right? To go through the looping mechanism, you have to put in a lot of manual operational work in order to achieve that, and at the same time, managing a position in itself can become slightly tricky. While if you go through just the Gearbox method, we have something called multi-call. So you know what Ilgiz was talking about in terms of leveling up ETH, then putting it on Lido, then going through Curve, then Convex, and that entire procedure. You don't actually have to go through multiple protocols in terms of actually opening up the DApps, right? Because they're contracts at the end of the day. So how Gearbox composability works today with a multi-call feature is that you can, in a single click, go ahead, lever up, and deploy the position on Convex in a single transaction without actually having to do much. So that's a very good UX feature that we have, and that's where we largely differ from looping and leverage, right? Where we have almost triple the capital efficiency while still having much better UX.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And just for anyone who's worrying about, well, how if I'm depositing on the lending pool and these strategies are going off and being highly levered in all these protocols, I think it's important to point out that the people who are borrowing the funds don't necessarily have the rights to do whatever they want to do with them. It's strictly siloed into proven kind of strategies as well, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if you just want to kind of clarify and touch on that.
Yeah, so that's what we call the allowed list, right? So, I mean, if you uh, want to just borrow 10 ETH against 1 ETH and want to put that into Baby Inu Shiba or something like that, that's not something that's possible. We have an allowed list which looks at assets in terms of their DEX liquidity at their scale in Gearbox in itself. And what would happen if we historically backtest the liquidations and what would happen to the bad debt. So wherever we feel there's enough safety on an asset, that's the only asset that we approve for now. That's the safer aspect of Gearbox. Of course, we'll be going a little more degen with mid-tail assets soon, probably in V3 or whatever comes up next. But yeah, that's how we kind of safeguard your LP without actually ever letting the borrower custody it.
Makes a lot of sense. So I just want to get into kind of Lido and Gearbox kind of synergies and how both sides of the fence are thinking about this. Carbus, I don't know if you want to kind of kick us off, if you guys have got any kind of very clear cuts where you see the synergies lie here, maybe post Shanghai or even in the present day, I suppose.
I think that probably the people on the Gearbox side would have much better ideas than me on this. In general, In general, we see STETH as basically two things. So I think one of them would be the best source of a base layer of yield in DeFi. I think it is already that now. So I think that at least whenever I thought about it, there's not any other single token that brings as much yield in absolute terms to Ethereum DeFi as this TETH, which is understandable, right? There's now $8 billion of TVL at 4 or 5% staking rewards a year. It's very significant, and so it's totally understandable that all sorts of protocols on top, be it as just normal collateral use case, all the way up to leverage use cases, make a lot of sense on top of it. I mentioned the Aave loop earlier. I know that, of course, on Gearbox there are also many possibilities of leveraging up on STETH. And I think that the key thing post Shanghai and post withdrawals is that it's going to be even safer to do all of these strategies on top of STETH, right? Because up until now, you basically have to price in the risk of market forces, discounting the value or the relative value of STETH to ETH, because like we know that there's one-to-one redeemability in the future of STETH, but at a certain point in time, obviously the trading ratio can drop, like it did, for example, post Luna last year, and that was just a market phenomenon, right? And I think that the key thing is that once withdrawals are enabled, it's going to be much harder for the market to price STETH lower than 1 ETH at any given point in time, because in a couple days, or at the worst in a couple weeks, basically all of the ETH gets withdrawn or unstaked until it's sold back into ETH and then arbitraged back to one-to-one. And I think that because of that, strategies like Gearboxes built on top of STETH just become safer and therefore more usable. And when I say more usable is either higher leverage or slightly higher risk strategies that just get de-risked post withdrawals.
Awesome. Does Gearbox side want to? Obviously, I see some immediate strategies and kind of synergies there, but I don't know how you guys are thinking of Stake ETH, Lido, and the whole Gearbox kind of collaboration, partnership, and synergies.
Yeah, to be very honest, how we look at it, I mean, to think about just liquid staking, right? I mean, it's one of the purest forms of yield you can get in DeFi, to be very honest. The source of yield here is literally one, the emission of additional Ethereum that happens every year, and second comes from the usage of Ethereum itself, right, with the burnt fees as well as MEV. So it's one of the best sources of yield that we feel is there, and we also feel it's very sustainable if you are obviously bullish on Ethereum being used over the next few years, right? So this is something that's sustainable, that's something that's real, and that's hard to combine DeFi, to be very honest. And with that being possible and Lido making the entire thing now liquid, I believe that we're in a pretty good position to leverage LSD. So again, how Gearbox works as is the base layer of leverage for DeFi, right? So when Lido goes ahead and creates that staking mechanism which works so well, all we really need to do is just activate leverage over there, because you're getting real ETH. You use the entire mechanism that Lido has created, but we just give you the ability to leverage it up and thus turn it into like a leveraged LSD strategy. So whatever strategies that are being developed, we are kind of not competing with them, but collaborating with all of them. So that's how largely the structure that Gearbox follows. And obviously, post Shanghai, we are expecting an increase in staking, and more specifically in liquid staking. So yeah, uh, pretty good, and pretty sure about liquid staking being something that will be here for years and be sustainable.
Nice, yeah, makes a lot of sense. So we've got around 20 minutes left on the clock. I know there's a lot of people in here, so if there's any questions from the audience, anyone wants to put the hand up, we'll do it like a first in, first out kind of style. If anyone's got any questions, just request to speak. But yeah, in the meantime, just as we're waiting for people to kind of request, I know we've got some kind of comments below. a lot of them are just shit posts, so I won't get into them. So Carvis, with this is something I've kind of always wondered, like with staked ETH and ETH and the ratio, and do you think the market can price in like the risk premium prior to Shanghai, and do you think that'll just completely converge to kind of 1-to-1 post that? I know it's been holding quite steady for a while now, but do you think there is like a perceived market premium for holding staked ETH at this point in time, and like how do you guys kind of think about
Um, I think the key thing there is that it it is totally true that us as just like this ratio is just a market sentiment thing, right? It's completely outside of Lido. It's completely outside of whatever work we do. It's just like literally on dexes. How much are people willing to pay in ETH terms or exchange in ETH terms for one ST? And sometimes they're willing to exchange 0.99 ETH, and sometimes they're willing to exchange one. And it is really interesting. If you guys want to dive deeper on this, if you go to the Lido Analytical account on Dune Analytics, we have our curve pool, which is the main one there, pretty well mapped out. And as basically in the past 2 months, as updates from the Ethereum Foundation on Shanghai and just in general, as updates on that and more certainty and confirmation on that came out, just in terms of communications, we literally saw that gap closing, and the gap was very small back then. Even 2 months ago, it was very very small. Still, it was probably under 1%, which is fine. It's just kind of like a zero coupon bond in traditional finance, where you know that you're going to be able to redeem for the underlying in the future, but not now, and so it just prices slight discounts. I think there are two things. So one of the things that affects that ratio that people don't really take into account is that if there's a lot more demand to go into ST than go out of ST, so if there are net new people that want to stake it in general with Lido, then it's very hard for that ratio to be either 1-to-1 because there's just net inflows. And whenever there's a net inflow, if it's not 1-to-1, those people will just opt to purchase ST indexes instead of stake new ETH. And so I think now that we're seeing total ETH like grow in general outside of Lido, that obviously allows Lido's ETH TVL also to grow. And so that's one of the things that has been putting it back into line. And then the other is just the psychological expectation that you are going to be able to withdraw. So even if it was just a couple basis points of discount, you can basically go into that position, and then whenever withdrawals are ready, you could arbitrage it back or just hold it, and you got maybe a couple extra days of yield for that year. Let's call it that, right? So I think that post withdrawals are one of the things that we will still need to have liquidity on dexes, because withdrawals are not going to be instant, right? So it's not going to be a perfect market where it's always going to be perfectly won. But it should never go into the ranges that we saw, for example, in mid 2022 post Luna collapse, or when the FTX collapsed and all of that, and there was a lot of turbulence. There's still going to be some wiggle room for it to move slightly, just because if there's like a couple million of ETH now, or 5 million of ETH, I think it's around that number, that's like in Lido. Not even like 10% or much less. I'm actually not sure of the number, but a very small percentage of that will be able to exit into ETH at any given day. And so if there is one of those market events like an FTX collapse, a Luna collapse, and there's a lot more demand to exit, then people will still need to just sell a lot of it on dexes, which will bring the ratio slightly down. But just over time, it will always go back up because because there's just the arbitrage mechanism.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So got Joe come up as a speaker. The floor is yours, sir, if you want to ask any questions. Might fall asleep. Joe, can you hear us? No. All right. Well, while we're waiting for Joe to come back, so He's opening his mic. No. Right. So yeah, I think that we can kind of round it up there. It's been great, and thank you both. Well, all three of you guys for coming. As I say, we will pull this down and get it onto YouTube and Spotify. So if you want to find that, just youtube.com/blocmates and just type us in on Spotify. That'd be great. And yeah, I suppose further down the line, once Shanghai's all gone live and withdrawals are open and things like that, and start seeing the second and third order effects, I think we should kind of run this back just to see if some of the kind of premonitions were kind of came true and things like that. So, but yeah, guys, thanks a lot, and everyone in the audience, thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you all soon.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.
All right, take it easy.